communications and storytelling is certainly not going anywhere anytime soon. And I think we're not going to move away from the fact that people want to know what the company stands for and how that translates to the products and the services that they offer. I started off in journalism. I was a newspaper reporter. I think I've always known that I wanted to be a reporter, loved telling stories, and found out pretty early that I could only retell them if they were true. I wasn't good at fictional stories. I can retell a true story. Fast forward, and I went to school for print journalism. I was a reporter for about 5 years in newspapers before I realized that maybe that industry was changing by quite a bit. And that I might wanted to sort of seek other opportunities. So I switched to PR. First, I started with consulting nonprofits on how they could share their stories, just using all of the experience I had learned from being a reporter. So then I got full-time, I suppose, from consulting into public relations in 2014. And I've been fortunate to work in communications, PR, marketing for some fantastic organizations, mostly nonprofit. One campaign that I was really, really proud of, I had some great ones, but one campaign was when I was working for my previous museum. It was an art and history museum, and it was around the pandemic, really just sort of hitting home and everyone having to stay home. And so we started a museum from home type series that really leaned on digital tools that teachers could tap into, that families could tap into who were at home, and that sort of thing. And it was called, not only was it Museum from Home, and you could do that in the classroom, but also we made sure to print out physical booklets and distribute them to communities or people who were either tired of just being online or may not have had the online access. So in a way to be more equitable, we didn't solely rely on those digital tools. We also partnered with the local school district to distribute activity booklets that could be used alongside those tools or standalone to help people just feel connected during the pandemic. So that was a great campaign. We had gotten a lot of press for that. And then we were also able to run some social media sponsorships at that time to make sure that we were getting the word out. So that was one of the, it was a really great campaign. And I ended up having to do a lot more video than I thought I was capable of. But you know, when you're in a situation where you have to make things work, you find skills that you didn't really know you had. So it was good, and I was very proud that we were able to pivot in that way. Whether you realize it or not, you are dealing with data from the moment you enter any communications job, because the first question you're usually asking yourself is who your audience is. And so that answer is based on data. It's based on a profile put together from these different metrics in terms of who's interacting with you, who's visiting your website, who's buying your tickets, you know, if you're a paid admission venue. So from that very first moment, you're trying to figure out who are we talking to and who wants to hear us. So my first for sure, experience with data would have been as a communications specialist at Goodwill, where I used to work. And it was huge to understand the client profile from our career center, but also the profile of who was buying from us, buying from Goodwill, and then who was the donor. So you sort of worked backwards. You located these audiences, you figured out who they were, and then you had to you had to strategize, well, what content can you put in front of these audiences so that they'll want to interact with you? So that, you know, that was data at that time. And then we, of course, always looked at our social media numbers. We looked at when we did do paid advertising, how well it did. And so we were able to figure out if what we were doing, what the content that we were delivering was working, and we were able to continue it or sort of tweak it as needed. Sometimes, you work for organizations that have a very direct line from sort of advertising or your marketing or even your PR to an outcome because somebody bought a ticket or somebody, your sales went up, right? So you can say, oh, we placed this ad and our sales went up, or here are the clicks. So we know, how that happened. With PR, because it's earned media, it can be a bit more challenging. There may not be that direct, someone read this story and then went to purchase or went to engage somehow. So there are different ways that you have to figure out what your value is and what those KPIs are. So particularly when I used to work at a free admission museum, we had to look at different ways at how is this being successful. So we may have done a PR campaign where we got a lot of news around an exhibit opening. Did we see a spike in people in the museum after that happened? Or did it take, 2 weeks? So gleaning from that, did people come in right away, or did it take them a while to sort of trickle in? And how can we adjust? So in that way, we really had to, in that specific example where it was free admission, so we didn't have ticket sales to rely on, we had to use anecdotal evidence, or we had to use if someone was registering for a workshop, for example. We had to try to find ways to figure out how we could measure and actually track how people were engaging with us. And that's going to look different depending on what organization you're with and what tools you have at your disposal. And we do have media monitoring software right now, and I deal specifically in my current role, I deal specifically with public relations. So a lot of that is going to be on the earned media side. So I'm always looking at reach. That's your audience. That's the potential audience of a news article. It'll track how many potential eyes you could have on it. That's always good. And I'm also always looking at if one outlet, for example, if their story got picked up by multiple outlets. So it's kind of like maybe you got a story placed with one outlet, but they've got such a network where it was sort of reproduced that same story multiple times. It used to be The Wire, right? Like Associated Press had The Wire. So it's similar to that, but it's these different partnerships that media outlets have where they'll reproduce the story. So I love looking at seeing if one media hit may have translated to, 7 or several, I should say, different areas where the story has been placed. But can I tell you another thing that really excites me though?
Sure.
I really like looking at it sort of backward. So I like identifying the audience, identifying the action that we want people to take. So our outreach may fall into a couple of different categories. It may be, what do we want people to do? We want people to buy a ticket. So that outreach might be more about exhibitions. We want people to know about our research. So that outreach might be more about a scientist. And so the exhibitions outreach will be more local because people who live here are more likely to come to the exhibition versus talking about the research, for example, may be more on an international scale because that's great news for everybody. I work at a scientific institution, so that's great news for everybody to hear, whether they're local or not. So really a lot of the strategy that we use, the way that we use data, is we're trying to figure out who we're talking to and where we can reach them. So if we want people to come physically, come to our building, then that outreach needs to be more local. And we need to figure out what is it about this exhibition, what is it about this news that will appeal to that particular audience. So really looking at your data and deciding, okay, here's who we want to talk to, and here's what they read, here's what they watch, here's what they listen to, and trying to figure out who are the people that they trust, specifically in PR, who are the outlets that they trust, and can we reach out to that outlet for a story? Because if they'll cover us, then we know we're in front of this audience, we're in front of this segment that we know is already interested in our content. So I really like to look at data and audiences from the front end as we sort of try to figure out how to strategize as well as looking at the results of how our outreach, I guess I should say, as well as looking at the results of our outreach. This moment was really pivotal for me as far as being a PR professional. So again, my background is in journalism, and so I took a certification course to sort of make that switch to advertising and PR and just try to figure out what my strategy would be. And I had a professor who gave an example that really changed the way I approach PR. He said he was working for a client and all they wanted was to be in this national outlet. Let's just say it's USA Today. I don't remember if this is what it was, but they wanted to be in this national outlet. All they wanted, it was a small robotics company, and all they wanted to do was be in USA Today. They just knew if they got that coverage, they would blow up. So he got the placement, he got it done, and they only got like 3 calls and like 2 were a wrong number, right? And they're just like, oh my gosh, what happened? Well, remember, they're this robotics company. And he said, well, let me try something else. Mm-hmm. And so instead, they ended up getting a placement in a magazine, small magazine that wasn't super mainstream, but ended up going to like a small Midwestern town that had a robotics company located there. So they get this placement and it blows up, phone ringing off the hook. And they're just like, wow. And that really just goes to show that it isn't always about the amount of eyes you have on you if it's not lined up with what your audience wants or needs. And that really changed the way that I do PR because it became more strategic. It wasn't just about how many eyes can I get on this. Like, of course, you want eyes on it. You want people to see it. But it really came about, well, what are we offering to people and how are we positioning it? Are we getting this in front of the best audience? So from that, if I've got, for example, a quilt exhibition, I might take a placement in a quilting magazine that I know is going to 25,000 quilters rather than maybe a huge placement that gets in front of millions, but it's on page 11 and maybe people see it and maybe they're excited or not. So, I mean, ideally you want all of that, right? You want both, but it's really just about making sure that your PR is targeted as well. It's not just, we get what we can get. We just want eyes on this. You need to think about what you want your PR to do and then strategize around that. Yeah, so right now, I mean, we use Meltwater is our primary monitoring tool. They have a lot of great tools and dashboards and reports that you can generate and things that you can look at quarter over quarter. They have a really interesting tool called Sentiment that's interesting, that tries to sort of tell if the article or if the news about you is negative or positive. So that's interesting, certainly from an issues management standpoint, of just knowing, you know, how your news is being received. But I think PR folks are always looking for that bottom line measurement. We are always trying to figure out the ROI. So there is the earned value that for a lot of people, you say this story would have been $11 million if we bought it. That's a really big number. That's kind of hard for people to understand. So I would just love a tool or a way to try to be able to explain that in a way that is more of a direct line from, you know, we had this news story run, and right now we can map it, as you mentioned before, but we had this set of stories run and we saw this bump, you know, that you can kind of correlate it. But, you know, of course, there are other marketing efforts going on. There's not just one line you can draw it to, but anything that can help me tell that story better of here is how our work contributed to the bottom line. Here's how we made new ambassadors for our organization. And I think that's hard. I don't know that people have really figured out what that direct line is. So I would love to see more of that. I do think that the role of PR continues to evolve and is still very important, because ultimately PR is about storytelling. It's about shaping these stories in a way that people can connect with and hopefully connect with your organization and with your brand. So what I'm seeing is in this period of it's a tough time, and people really want transparency. They don't necessarily want a gimmick. They don't want a slogan. They want a conversation. They want to feel like they know your values and they know what you stand for. So I think PR is going to have to be ready to tell these stories, not just in in a reactive way, like you have to have a PR campaign after something goes wrong, but in a way where you're constantly telling your stakeholders who you are in an authentic and an engaging way. So, you're just always sharing stories that demonstrates what you do and hopefully the value you bring and what they can get from you. So I think that communications and storytelling is certainly not going anywhere anytime soon. And I think we're not going to move away from the fact that people want to know what the company stands for and how that translates to the products and the services that they offer. So, and PR is at the heart of that because we're storytellers. So we are sharing that message all the time. Data is continually evolving, which is why at every conference you have a session just on like data. What do you do with it? How do you measure it and not get lost? Because there's so many numbers, there are so many ways that you can use it. So I think that it is going to continue to be important. There's more data that can be gathered all the time that contribute to the audience segments that we talked about before. So I think data is going to give us a clearer picture of who we're talking to as companies and organizations and who wants to talk to us. So which messages are getting across and which messages are landing and where can we improve. And then I think too, the data will help us know if we've told the story in a way that's being received. I think we're so close to our work and our organizations that it's super easy for us to understand what we're trying to say, but are people receiving it in the way that we think? So hopefully, the data will tell you if you've created more fans for your organization and more people who want to engage with you. The way that you measure that, though, is going to be different depending on the organization that you're in. My advice this day and age is to try to understand it all, even if it's not your job. Try to understand what it is and how it relates to what you're doing. So when I don't know something, I'm like, I need to go get a certificate. I need to go, learn more about this. I need to schedule some classes on this. And that's part of the reason why I pursued my MBA. I was very much the creative side, and I was like, I need to understand the business side of it. Even if I never do it, even if I'm never solely responsible for sales, I need to understand what that is and how my team can contribute to it. So I would say just talk to people, you don't have to go get an MBA if you don't want to, but talk to other departments, talk to colleagues and ask them what they do, or take classes that may be a little bit out of your norm or what you're actually getting your degree in to understand these other areas, because then you'll do better in strategizing how you can help.